Hello humans and demons alike, welcome back to the Cleanup, the show where we discover misinformation and learn new things and perspectives. Now, I love Hazbin Hotel as much as the next guy, but for me, something always felt off about the season 2 finale. Something didn't quite make sense. Not because Vox lost per se, even though I thought it would be a great option for him to win and then make season 3 about defeating him, and that's besides the point, so I will stop rambling. No, what annoyed and weirded me out was the way he was taken down. So, I have spent the last few days investigating exactly what felt off to me and why, and try to use logic to prove why something felt off and why it is unsatisfying and why he should have won. So I'm going to try to explain exactly that. When discussing the season finale and Vox's defeat, the first thing that comes to mind is of course the breaking of Alistair's deal with both him and Rosie. That's actually also where the problems begin. The problem for me isn't that Vox acted stupid because of the plot. This isn't out of character for him. His IQ seems to, for some reason, always drop to 0 when he is around Alistair. No, the problem begins with the implication that this scene brings with it. The scene implies that the exact wording of a contract is extremely important to how it actually functions in the show. A common trope for shows that take place in hell. Vox says it himself actually. Alistair only defeated him because of a technicality.
Thank you!
You absolute idiot!
What, this? This doesn't count, I didn't hurt her!
I didn't say not to hurt her, you moron! I said you're not to lay your hands on her! And you did! You pathetic amateur!
Fucking wordplay? You tricked me with a fucking technicality? Seriously?
This exact wording stuff becomes a problem when applied to other major contract, the one between Rosie and Alistair. The contract between Alistair and Rosie states that Alistair is, or becomes, the most powerful sinner in hell.
I can grant you power. Power beyond what your mortal mind can imagine. The most powerful sinner in hell, but you must do something for me. And until you complete this task, your soul will be mine.
It's a deal.
The first thing about the phrasing that jumped out to me is the time conditions of the contract. The contract says Alistair has to be the most powerful sinner in hell, however, it doesn't say for how long. So technically, the contract shouldn't have been broken since it doesn't say for how long Alistair had to be the strongest sinner. So Rosie could have just made him the strongest sinner for like a second, and then the deal would be filled in on her part. Another detail about the deal that I noticed is Rosie saying she can grant him power beyond what his mortal mind can imagine.
I can grant you power. Power beyond what your mortal mind can imagine.
So either Alistair is incredibly at a loss of fantasy when it comes to power, or, the more likely option, this sentence wasn't actually part of the deal, and the deal began with the sentence, you will be the most powerful sinner in hell. But let's just assume that the utter failure to mention a time range for the conditions means that Alistair always has to be the strongest sinner for the deal to uphold. But is breaking the contract even a problem in the first place? Vox becomes the strongest sinner, Alistair gets the contract broken, and the master plan stays in motion. Seems great, right? Yeah, not really. But what it makes narratively unsatisfying is that immediately after we are explicitly told that Vox is now the strongest sinner and Alistair gets a huge advantage from it, from getting free from Rosie's contract, Alistair defeats Vox within 30 seconds in the fight afterwards, and Vox has to call up Shockwave to help him not get fried completely. This isn't logical, and it makes all the more frustrating to see Alistair fans then posting the whole "Vox couldn't even defeat an injured Alistair with a half-broken staff when he was at his strongest" stick. But remember, we aren't being told something like Vox is now at his strongest or something like that. No, it is explicitly relevant for the contract and the plot that he's the strongest sinner and has to explicitly become stronger than Alistair. So Alistair defeating him in his injured state right afterwards is narratively extremely unsatisfying. But as previously said, there are actually a few counter arguments that I've encountered for why Vox lost against Alistair. First, some argue, as I mentioned, that strength comes in many forms, and as such, Vox doesn't have to become the strongest physically for the deal to get broken. It would be enough if he is just become the most public seen figure, since that would grant him the strength of positive public perception and attention, which would be greater than Alistair's in this category, while still being physically weaker than him, explaining the defeat. To argue against this claim, we only need to remind ourselves that it is heavily implied that Vox's physical strength is that of course correlated to his approval ratings. This is evidenced by him only being able to reach his full demon form after getting the 100% approval rating, and by him saying that he is stronger than ever before.
I'll just beat your ass back into submission! I am more powerful than I've ever been!
Oh, don't sell yourself short! You're the most powerful sinner in hell now! I have to thank you for that. Your little power grab helped break another chain that's been holding me back for quite some time.
Further evidence that the deal is actually about physical strength and not just public perception is that Alistair wants to get his staff fixed by Rosie in episode 4 because he claims he is lacking power, implying that it is indeed about physical strength. Finally, the deal doesn't mention different metrics of strength, therefore implying that there is indeed only one kind of strength that determines if the deal is broken or not. Otherwise, if the word strength can now be applied to something as specific as public perception, this would mean that that would also be applicable to any other kind of being the strongest at one specific thing. To make an example, Valentino is definitely better than Alistair at shooting guns. If that now counts as a form of strength, the deal would have been void immediately, as well as if any sinner surpasses Alistair in any kind of category of so-called strength. Since the deal doesn't mention any specific categories for strength, and the only category it is implied to apply to is physical strength, we can now reasonably assume that the contract only applies to physical strength, therefore we can effectively discard this argument. Another argument that many people make to argue against the supposed big power difference we would expect from a fight between an explicitly strongest sinner Vox and an injured Alistair with a half-broken staff is that the deal only broke and Vox only surpassed Alistair in physical power because he was injured and his staff was half broken. This would make it, although still unsatisfying, much more realistic that Alistair could in fact defeat Vox, since the power difference would be a lot smaller than if the deal took Alistair at his full strength as a benchmark and Vox had to surpass this benchmark to become the strongest sinner, which would make him realistically a lot stronger than an injured Alistair. However, this argument runs in a problem. If we assume that the deal does indeed take into account the current physical state of Alistair and then determines based on that if the deal is currently still active or not, i.e. if Alistair is still the strongest sinner or not, we would have to assume that this is also true for any other point in the story. This quickly becomes a problem because at the end of season 1, Alistair has been significantly weakened. His staff is fully broken and he is even more injured than in his fight against Vox.
Place reeks of death, there's a chill in the air, and I barely escaped being killed by a hair.
So if we take this into account, that would mean that he is still the strongest sinner at that point in time. This implies that even a significantly injured Alistair with a fully non-functional staff is still stronger than any other overlord. Not just Vox, but also Camilla, Zestral, and presumably Rosie herself, if she's even a sinner. We don't know that yet. Furthermore, that could mean that one of two things. Either Rosie gave Alistair so much excess power at the start that even with no staff and while significantly injured he is still a stronger sinner, or Rosie has to constantly supply him with enough power to keep him above the threshold. In both cases it is worth asking why Rosie does this or did this, and why she can't simply ensure Alistair always stays the strongest sinner by either giving him so much power at the start that it is effectively impossible for anyone to surpass him at any point, or by supplying him simply with enough power constantly to stay above the threshold. If she can't do that because she isn't powerful enough, then giving him a lot of excess power at the start but not this much that that is impossible to surpass him wouldn't make any sense, because Rosie has no motive to do that. Either her motive is to ensure that the deal is always active, which she presumably can't do, because then she would have given Alistair just a lot of more power, so nobody could surpass him ever, or her goal is to just supply him with enough power to make the deal safe for now. Then it wouldn't be sensible for her to give him any excess power in the first place. Either way, with this logical dilemma leaves us with one of two conclusions. Either Alistair possesses so much excess power in his full form that even without his staff and while significantly injured, he is still the strongest sinner, or if the deal doesn't account for his current state, Vox would have to surpass the power of Alistair's full form in order to become the strongest sinner, which makes the supposed power difference in the fight even greater, thus makes Vox's quick and easy defeat even more unsatisfying. So, Baxter is a very interesting character to say the least. He is the stereotypical, as he says it himself, mad scientist archetype. The problem that I have with him in the final is that he is way too powerful. The power scaling of him against every other character is plain out ridiculous. Let me explain why. First, his reasoning at staying at the hotel is incredibly shaky. He wants to study the fascinating concept of redemption, which is okay reasoning, but then says immediately something afterwards that, if you think about it for even a second, makes no sense from the perspective of a serious scientist.
I am here to study this fascinating concept of redemption. My hypothesis is that it's impossible.
Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but to my understanding, science has always been that at first you don't assume anything about a new phenomenon, especially not that it's impossible, because why would you study it then? You just say, well, we don't know how and if this is even possible, and then go about studying it, collecting at least a bit of evidence in one direction to then form a hypothesis and try to flesh the theory of this specific thing out. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that a scientist not just goes to a new phenomenon and says, well, my first hypothesis is that this is impossible, but I will study it anyway. But even worse than his reasoning is that he is never actually shown working on his supposed goal. The only time we see him do anything related to his science stuff is that he is either giving bugs lungs and other stuff so they can play with Nifty, or in the final straight up hacking all of Vox tech. And that leads me into the second problem with him. We are explicitly told that he is a bioscientist. This distinction seems to be very important to him, even to the point where he's degrading Panchas for doing the boring part of engineering while he does bioengineering.
We used to work together back in the day. I specialized in bioengineering, and he in the boring engineering. However, it quickly became apparent that his silly contraptions were too outdated to gain us interest, whereas my bio-experiments won the attention of many.
This clear orientation turns into a problem when we remember what he is actually doing in the final. He isn't creating giant bugs to help fight disease, he isn't creating some kind of biological suit for himself or others. He isn't even making some kind of biological material that could maybe be used to disable the likely very sensitive computer systems in the building. No, what he's doing is he is hacking. Now, the skill of hacking falls into a specific field of computer science, not biological engineering. Especially not chemical biological engineering, which seems to be the category on which he falls on. I get that the trope of smart scientist who can do anything that has remotely to do with any kind of science is common, but if you're going out of your way to say that Baxter is a bioengineer and make that an important part of his character and his relationship with Penges, you can't really pull this card anymore. But even if we ignore that, there's still a lot of incoherence when it comes to Baxter. First of all, according to the Hazbin Hotel wiki, and as implied by the flashback scene, Baxter was personally hired by Vox and holds high regard among the VoxTech staff. According to a Q&A livestream, it was confirmed that he even created Shockwave for Vox at some point. So you're telling me that VoxTech and therefore the V's themselves either have no idea or didn't care that one of their top employees who created Shockwave, one of the few things Vox actually seem to generally care about, was just staying at the Hazbin Hotel. In fact, they apparently didn't care to the point where they didn't revoke his entry privileges, but simultaneously also didn't once check on him. And even if the V's themselves didn't care, someone at VoxTech must have noticed that one of their top employees had just gone missing. Vox is a control freak. He would have definitely made it so all employees had to call in regularly and probably also share their location permanently while working for VoxTech or some shit like that. Just letting one of their top employees stay at the Hazbin Hotel without doing anything about it is so out of character for Vox and his company. Hell, this would be out of character for any fucking company. And Shockwave sees Baxter also as an intruder into the building, not as a regular employee. Let alone his creator. Which raises the question, why does he still have access to the building in the first place if he is identified as an intruder? One would think a potential intruder wouldn't have like employee entry privileges to one of the top buildings. But even if we grant all that for the sake of narrative, that still doesn't explain the power scaling. Baxter is able to, within mere seconds, turn off all cameras of the entire VoxTech building simply by plugging in his little laptop into a connection right at the door.
Yeah, there. That should disable every camera in the building.
Vox's whole thing is cameras and control, and I get that he is arrogant, but he is also not stupid. He knows that he has enemies and he trusts basically no one. So you're telling me the fucking media overlord has such poor cybersecurity that you can override all of his cameras with one simple laptop? But Baxter's frankly unbelievable as in not believable powers don't stop there. He then goes on to hack the entire building, including Vox-controlled hologram screens in what can only be a couple of minutes at most.
Copy, paste, highlight. There. Get ready, Nifty. I don't think we'll be alone for long.
What the hell?
But it doesn't stop there either. He then goes on to not only block Shockwave, but also Vox himself. The one single bioscientist manages to hack into Vox's own body within a couple of minutes and remain there not only for a few seconds either. Vox has to basically perform a factory reset and adjust his voice manually to go back to normal.
Alright, princess, this is my
Always wanted to do that.
In our battle to defend against Adam and the Exorcist army, Penches fought valiantly and ultimately sacrificed his life to protect... Technical difficulties? Be a minute.
But this still isn't the end. No, my friends. After hacking the entire building, disabling all the cameras and hacking into Vox's very own body, he then proceeds to basically save Nifty by disabling Velvet's powers.
That's it! What the fuck? Mad scientist, bitch!
So let's recap. After having a scientifically nonsensical hypothesis about redemption, Baxter goes to the hotel to study it. We never see him actually do anything to study it. Meanwhile, Voxtech somehow didn't notice or didn't care that the literal creator of Shockwave had gone missing, while simultaneously making Baxter as an intruder, even though he has still legitimate access to the building, which is never taken away. After that, Baxter proceeds to hack all the cameras, all the systems in the building, Vox's body, and finally take away Velvet's powers, all by being explicitly an established bioscientist. Okay. After we have explored the problems with taking contracts too literally and making random scientists the most powerful figure at the end arc of the season, let's now actually come to the actual ending of the season. After Vox has his crash out and is sailing down to finally wipe that smile off Alistair's fucking face, Kamala warns him that the weapon would overload if he did shoot another time. First of all, this is of course narratively very convenient and was also never brought up as a potential issue by Camilla or anyone else, even though she made the weapon and likely would have warned Vox about it. So this comes kind of out of nowhere, but okay. But regardless, now we know it, and after Vox gets stopped from his suicidal action, there's another question of how to stop the weapon. A question that actually has been asked and answered earlier in the series.
Yeah! What about the giant gun?
I'm glad you asked. While everyone's focused on Charlie and Emily, I'm going to try to destroy the weapon.
How are you gonna do that?
I'll figure it out! I'll figure it out!
Yeah, that's it. So now that's a problem, wouldn't you say? The question has been asked and basically answered with, yeah, I have no idea how we gotta stop this huge threat. Guess we'll figure it out on the way. To try to illustrate a parallel to point out how absurd this is, let's say Vox on the question of how to actually reach heaven and attack the angels just says, yeah, I don't know how we will attack heaven, but we'll figure it out. Vox here seems to suffer from the typical villain problem of getting his mistakes punished unproportionally. So he makes one little mistake and the whole plot stays in motion. But the heroes get away with not knowing anything about how to stop a huge fucking threat to their existence. Also, Alistair also makes the mistake of making the deal with Rosie without asking anything about the conditions, and seemingly gets away with that as well. So Vox's mistakes have been improbably punished in comparison to the heroes or Alistair's. Much like with Baxter with this whole bioscientist thing, it's also made worse by the fact that it has been specifically called out before. Had there never been called attention to the issue, or maybe never even considered it a great issue, then sure, it would still be an incredibly cheesy and Disney-esque ending, and I will probably still dislike it, but at least we wouldn't have the issue of explicitly addressing it and dismissing it as, well, we'll figure it out later. And the worst part is, it actually fucking works. But on a last note, we have to talk about Alistair again. I know we all don't want to, but we have. Because not only did he defeat Vox against all logic and narratively correct storytelling, but he now also gets to put enough pressure on Rosie to get his fucking star fixed. By the way, his line, "you watch them die unless you do," implies that they actually need him. So all these efforts of all these overlords would have been nothing without Alistair. Thanks Alistair for saving the series, I guess. Let's just say Vox was my voice during this song.
Wait, what? What the fuck is happening? Stop it right now! No, 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 no! Stop it! I hate this! Ruining everything!
And that was another episode of the cleanup. Hopefully you enjoyed this little critique on the final. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Maybe some of you have some other points or think that I'm wrong on something. constructive criticism is always appreciated. Thank you all for watching, and always remember, trust us with your everything.